Thank you so much. We're so glad that you have joined us. This brokerage is not only dedicated to making sure that our clients receive the best in service and care, but we're also committed to making sure that we care well for our community. As many of you may know, January is Human Trafficking Month. This is a cause that is near and dear to our hearts that we want to bring awareness to. It is imperative that we educate ourselves on what human trafficking looks like in our communities, how we can help contribute to its end as well. With us tonight is Martha Kannas, Executive Director of Exploit No More and Freedom House. She will ensure that we are informed and made aware of what trafficking looks like, how we can help prevent it, and spread hope. Martha, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to join you this evening and to help exploit no more in putting an end to human trafficking. We'll let you get started.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. And thanks to MyPro Realty for this wonderful invitation. And thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. This is not an easy topic to talk about. And so I always give a lot of credit to folks who volunteer their time to learn about this topic, especially, as Kelly said, this month, January is National Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So thank you for caring and for taking the time. I'm going to admit right up front, I am no technology wizard. I have this wonderful team behind me. So I'm going to try to flip over to a slide deck that I use to present. I do these presentations all the time, and it's just real high level and basics of what is human trafficking, what does it look like, what's going on in our area, in the greater Milwaukee area, what can we do about it if we see it. And I would love to take questions throughout. Kelly is going to be our moderator. So if you have some questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll get to those as soon as we can. And then we'll also have some time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. A little bit about me. I am the Executive Director of Exploit No More. We have been around for about 10 years, and we have 3 programs, which I'll talk more about at the end. But our main program is the Freedom House, which is a safe house for women who are fleeing sex trafficking and sexual exploitation, and also experiencing homelessness. So I've been part of the organization for a few years. I love it. We're doing great work, and the need is really big. And we'll talk about that and why that is in our area. So I am going to try sharing and doing everything they told me to do, which I think is here. Chris, is this correct?
Looks good. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. At Explain No More, we say that people are not property. And, the idea of actually owning people and owning their bodies is a big part of trafficking. And what we like to do when we first start talking about it is to actually define what human trafficking is. Sometimes people have never heard that term. A lot of times people in our presentations will say, yeah, I think I know some about it, especially when we have things like the Jeffrey Epstein case, which in the past week has come back to the headlines of hopefully naming some of the buyers that have been involved in that horrific scandal. So they maybe heard about it there, but aren't really sure what it is. And so we like to start with, what exactly is human trafficking? There are many types of human trafficking. At Exploit No More, we do focus on sex trafficking, but I'd like to go over a few of the other types too. And the definition is that it involves the use of 1, 2, or 3 things, and that's force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. So again, we'll talk about sex trafficking. Labor trafficking is another very prominent form of trafficking, both in the United States and across the world. And that is what we're used to seeing if we have migrants coming across the border and then are employed in unsafe conditions, not paid properly, completely exploited for their labor, looking at sweatshops, looking at child labor being violated. So labor trafficking and sex trafficking are the top 2 types of trafficking. Organ trafficking is something that we don't see much in the United States, but does happen. Does happen in other parts of the world, mostly from demands from Westerners who are waiting on long transplant lists and have the means to try to purchase an organ on the black market. And this does not look like it does in the movies where someone wakes up in a bathtub of ice. It happens where someone is, again, frauded into going into a bunk medical facility thinking that they are having some kind of procedure, or that let's say their kidneys being removed because of an illness, when actually it's being removed to sell to someone else. Child marriage happens all over the world. Usually that is a very young girl, maybe 11, 12 years old, who's married off to a much older man. And we've seen this increase in places of conflict, like in Afghanistan, certainly Ukraine, where sometimes families will be so desperate and will, again, be frauded to say, if you sell your daughter, she will have a much better life. She will be cared for. She'll be able to go to America. And really, they end up with good intentions and thinking that's the way to save their daughter, when they actually end up selling her into sexual slavery. Child soldiers also happen. So in places of conflict where they force children to be on the front lines, as they consider them expendable and take the brunt of violent attacks, that happens in regimes all over the world as well. So there's always been trafficking, and right now there are more people enslaved in the world than ever before. And there are a lot of reasons for that. As our world becomes more sophisticated in our technology and to be able to communicate and transport goods and people across the world, this problem is only growing. So what exactly is sex trafficking specifically? Again, inducing a person, there are those three things again: force, fraud, or coercion, to participate in commercial sex acts, or in which the person induced to perform such acts has not attained 18 years of age. This has only been a legal definition since the year 2000. So defining and putting law around trafficking is relatively new in our society. And, what do those three things look like in sex trafficking? Force is probably what you think it would be, in that someone is using physical violence to force someone to participate in sex acts. Fraud, we see this very commonly in the people we work with, where someone has presented themselves or an opportunity that is just not true. So someone says, I have a modeling opportunity, or to work in a store, a boutique, or nannying, waitressing, a factory job. The list can go on, where the victim thinks it's a true opportunity. And once they get there, once they check it out, they realize that the person was totally fraudulent and it's not that. And sometimes then they're caught, and they're stuck there and they're held against their will, and their ID is taken, money's taken, phone, any way to communicate. And now here they are in this situation that they thought was an actual good opportunity. And then coercion. The way that this looks in sex trafficking is a lot of blackmailing and a lot of threatening. So saying, all right, I have you on video doing this particular sex act. And if you don't do it again, if you don't continue to do it, I will send that video to your spouse, to your family, friends, on social media, to your employer. Another way that some of our clients experience is the threatening of other family members. And what will happen is, because we all use social media to talk about, let's say, Jimmy's first day of second grade. So we're excited about it. And on Facebook, we put a photo of Jimmy in his backpack and he's ready. And we say, we're so excited. Jimmy is at Southside Elementary School. His teacher's Miss Smith. He's entering second grade and we're so proud of him. Well, now we have all that information in the public. So a trafficker could say to a victim, I know where Jimmy goes to school, what he looks like, what his backpack looks like, who his teacher is. And if you don't do this, I am going to go after Jimmy. And those threats can really coerce people into following whatever a trafficker says out of fear that their loved ones will be hurt. The other part of this definition, when a person induced to perform such acts has not attained 18 years of age. So by law, anyone who is a minor, who is under 18, and who is involved in commercial sex acts is automatically considered a trafficking victim. There is no such thing as a child prostitute. And we'll see those headlines, right? We'll see child prostitution ring busted. We don't even want to call it what it is, even in our headlines. A child can't be a prostitute because that says that they have some kind of choice in it. And by law and by our values as a society, we say that children cannot consent to sexual acts. So if a child is involved in commercial sex acts, it is automatically considered human trafficking. Any questions?
None.
Okay, great. We'll keep going then. So sometimes people will say, all right, so what is trafficking specifically, or how does it differ from prostitution? And so when we talk about trafficking, we often use a triangle as a visual because there are three parties involved. So on the lower left, we see the trafficker. This is the person who supplies the demand. This is the person who is victimizing and who is going to keep whatever the item of value in the exchange is. Most of the time it's money, but sometimes it could be drugs, it could be property, it could be power and position. And so the trafficker is the one that is going to actually benefit from the value of this transaction. At the top of the triangle, of course, is the buyer. Sometimes we refer to this as a John, but we in the anti-sex trafficking field prefer to call it what it is. They're buyers. They're buying sex. They're often buying sex from children. And so this is the person who creates demand. This is the person who agrees to participate in this. If there were no buyers, there would be no victims and no traffickers. A simple supply and demand chain. And then, of course, on the lower left is the victim. This is someone who, because of force, fraud, or coercion, is in a commercial sex situation where they are not keeping the item of value. Again, the money exchanged. That's the main difference between the legal definition of human trafficking and prostitution. That in prostitution, in theory, is an exchange between two parties. And if someone decides to sell themselves for sex, for money, they keep the money. And now in reality, that very rarely happens too. These, human trafficking and prostitution, there's a real blurry line between them. But by definition, that's the difference, is that trafficking is even worse because the victim is not actually receiving the item of value in the exchange. There needs to be these three parties. And if there weren't buyers, there wouldn't be traffickers or victims. So who does this happen to? Who are the victims of sex trafficking? They can be women, men, boys, and girls. Sometimes people will think this only happens to females, and it certainly is the majority of victims, but men and boys absolutely are trafficked, and this happens to them too. We will actually see a video clip of the story of a teen boy who was trafficked in just a moment. US citizens and immigrants, again, sometimes we think that this only can happen to people who are not here legally. This happens to US citizens and people who are immigrants. They're probably particularly vulnerable because of being so scared of their immigration status, but it definitely happens to both types of people. People from rural areas and people from the city. Misconception we have is that this is an urban problem for our poor inner cities, and it generally happens to people of color. And that is not true. There are trafficking cases reported in all 72 counties of Wisconsin. This absolutely happens in rural areas, and it happens in affluent suburban areas too. This is not just a poor girl issue. This happens to people who are living in upper middle class homes. And you would never think that this could be going on in their family, and it is. Again, poor people, rich people, certainly people who are under-resourced and living in poverty, doing survival living, are more vulnerable because this could appear to be a way out. But this happens to people who have means as well, and who are involved in this maybe for different reasons, or they got trapped into it for different reasons. And straight and gay folks. Certainly the LGBTQ community can be very vulnerable to this. And in the Milwaukee area in the last handful of years, there have been some very brutal murders of trans folks who have been doing street-based sex work, who are trafficked, who are doing prostitution. They can be very vulnerable for very brutal outcomes. So who are all these people? When we look at this list, this is everyone, right? This is you, me, this is everyone and anyone who has vulnerabilities. And that's what traffickers do. They look for people's vulnerabilities to exploit them. And all of us have vulnerabilities. And at different times of our lives, we might have been more vulnerable as a young person, as someone, maybe a time in our life where we weren't sure where our next paycheck was coming from, or our housing wasn't secure, or we were pressured by a boss, or pressured by an intimate partner. So this can happen to anyone because everyone has vulnerabilities. And traffickers who have a lucrative business are masterminds of manipulation. They are not just some pimp on the street. They are true business people who understand how to manipulate people and how to prey on those vulnerabilities, how to force or fraud or coerce people into getting into a situation that is nearly impossible for them to get out of. What I'd like to do now is show a short video clip. This is produced by the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families. It's just a few minutes, but I think it's really interesting because these are 4 real people who are from this area, who bravely volunteered to tell some of their story. And there are 4 different ways that they got involved in this. And I think it's a great example of showing how there are so many different ways that people can become trapped in this. So we'll take a look at this, and then I have some comments after.
I'm Kimberly. I like poetry. I'm really into music. It helps me get away from the outside world. My mom had passed away when I was 10 years old. My father had custody of us, and he chose his girlfriend over me and my little sister and just up and left us in an apartment and never came back for weeks at a time. Our electricity went off, and that's when the lady who lived upstairs decided this was a prime opportunity for her. That's actually how it happened. I went to her. That's how it happened. I went to her and told her my electricity had been cut off, and me and my little sister don't have no lights downstairs. And the lady told me, hey, if I do this, me and my little sister will never get separated. We'll have everything we need. We won't lose our place. And so I felt like what I was doing was to support my family, and it was an okay thing to do, not really understanding that it really wasn't.
I was just a typical young girl that liked to play with Barbies, play basketball, and I ran track. Church too, I went to church, sung in a choir. Had 2 other siblings. I was the only girl. Black version.
I wouldn't be who I am without Caitlin, because Caitlin brings the girly out of me, and she makes me feel like I'm furious, like I can get whatever I need to done.
It was my sophomore year in high school. Me and my parents had an altercation. I had left. I decided to leave. I ran across some different type of people that I never thought they were. I thought they were friends. I met the girl at school. I thought she was my friend. That's when my life changed. I met the young lady. She introduced me to a pimp, and then eventually he introduced me to one of his friends.
To see someone that you love, someone that you call your sister, could go from just being this bubbly young lady, we're going places and we're happy and the relationship is different between our parents, to now it's she's not really around her parents, she's going out of town.
My son died on September 30th, 2016. He is a boy who was trafficked, but I also want you to remember that he was a beautiful young man.
He was super funny and outgoing. He loved art. He was super good at art.
Between his drawing and his writings, he really has quite a talent. I was in a verbally abusive marriage. My husband was an alcoholic. When I left him, it was good for the family to remove ourselves from that situation. Jeffrey was probably 4th or 5th grade. Jeffrey was teased, picked on a lot through middle school. He was just trying to figure out where he fit in, to try to find his place.
I knew right away that he was doing drugs. He just got into the wrong group of kids. They strive so hard to fit into those groups, and when nobody gives them attention, they're going to seek for those friends that do give them attention.
There was a point in childhood that my parents divorced, so then my mom was a single mom, because my dad was just kind of not really in the picture. I was probably 15 when we moved here. So when I came up here to the schools, the transition, it was a hard transition. So I had dropped out at that time. And I did end up pregnant. Within the first few conversations, he was all about my life, and I opened up to him about it because, at the time I did not have very many people that I was in contact with anymore. And then, within a few weeks, it turned more into a sexual relationship. That went on for, a week or two before he brought up, trafficking me.
So those are some snapshots of people's, unique situations of how this happened to them. The first one where she talks about, that she was left to take care of herself and her little sister, and that was their vulnerability. And the woman upstairs exploited that and trafficked her. Jeffrey, which was an incredibly sad story. His mom, Lisa, is a friend of Exploit No More. And he died and she's very, very open about this. He died from a drug overdose when he was 17. Drug addiction is incredibly common with people who are trafficked, whether it's because they're taking drugs to numb themselves from the terror that they're experiencing, or because a trafficker has actually forced them to become addicted, and that just gives them more control. If they're the person who is providing that fix for them, or we'll have women come to work with us and say, I've been up for 3 days without sleeping, without eating, because he forced me to do crack for 3 days straight so I could have that many dates and serve that many people in 3 days. So Lisa actually didn't know that he was trafficked until at his funeral. His traffickers had mailed the funeral home some photos of him in sex acts while being trafficked. And fortunately, the funeral home staff intercepted that and held that from her, and gave them to her after. And she said it took her a few months to even look at those photos. And that's how she learned that he had also been trafficked. And again, you think, why would someone do that? To exercise that control and that power of saying, I still have control of this. This is what I did. And that's that part of coercion and that part of the psychological war that is when people are trying to own other people. And Lisa's really wonderful at sharing Jeffrey's story, because again, we often don't think that boys and men can be victims of this as well. So how are they finding people? How do they find the four individuals that we just heard from? How are traffickers going out and recruiting people? And a lot of times people will come up to us and say, oh, I've seen the movie Taken with Liam Neeson. It's like that, right? Where someone is pulled into a van that has no windows and sped away. Fortunately, stranger abduction is extremely rare in the United States. But maybe even more sad is that the actual top recruiters are people who are very close to victims, the very people who should be loving them and caring for them and protecting them can be the people who are actually their traffickers. And many of the women that we serve will say that their mother was their first trafficker. And mom trafficked them out at 12, 13 years old. And often that is because mom has a substance abuse problem, and that is a way for them to get her own fix, sell their daughter, offer their daughter up for sex so they could score their drugs. Sometimes it could be for rent in exchange to be able to stay somewhere, a job. But sometimes it's mom, sometimes it could be mom's boyfriend or a stepdad. It could be, brothers, uncles, friends. The one woman talked about that. Actually, it was another female that befriended her and was the gateway into being trafficked. And again, traffickers will send out other people, and sometimes women, because again, you would trust that person and think that you're having a female friendship when really they're preying upon the person as well. So family members and caregivers. Another top recruiter type is an intimate partner. So actually someone's boyfriend, girlfriend, or legal spouse. We are actually serving a few people right now at Exploit No More whose legal husbands are the ones that had been trafficking them to control, to make some more money, or to use it in a manipulative way, forcing a spouse to have sex with other people in order to gaslight them and turn it around and say, you're cheating on me. And then employers is the third type. That goes along a lot with the fraud. So again, people who are presenting to have an opportunity that they really don't. So recently we had someone staying with us who was so excited about a new storefront opening up, a new boutique and kind of a pop-up shop near Milwaukee. And once she got there for her first day of work, she quickly discovered that it really was just a facade, just a front fake store, and in the back was trafficking and prostitution going on. And so sometimes employers can trap people into those situations through the promise and the guise of a job. And the way that these recruiters, these traffickers get people to stay is through a process that we call grooming. And grooming can take various forms. Sometimes it can be very violent and using fear as a way to get compliance. Often it's the opposite. It's befriending, learning someone's personal information. Again, in that Facebook example, gaining their trust, preying on their vulnerability of love or needing love from a man. And this can happen when people don't have an absent father in their lives. And the fourth story, she talked about that if someone is so desperate for the love and affection and attention of a man that they are, looking to this person and trusting this person to treat them well. Or people have grown up in an environment where they have no healthy relationships to learn from. And they think this is what happens to women. This is what a relationship looks like, that sometimes you get beat. Sometimes you have to go out and have sex with some other guys to bring some money in to do right by your man. This is just how it is, right? They haven't been exposed to better relationships than that. So that's how people can come in and say, I will love you the way that you deserve to be loved, that your family is letting you down. I'll be your family. So it starts that way. And then once they're locked in, then the demands begin to happen. So people will ask us, well, what are some signs? How would I know that this would be happening? What would I be looking for? This is a list of things that could happen. Certainly, some of these happening does not indicate sex trafficking necessarily, but if there's a group of them, it could be a red flag. Skipping school or work when that's unusual for someone, the possession of money, multiple phones, or material items that can't be explained, especially for young people. So we'll have parents that have said, suddenly they got their hair done, they got their nails done, they have some new clothes, they have a second phone. Where are these things coming from? A change of attitude, behavior, secrecy that is new and unusual for that person. Has run away or been kicked out of their home. Certainly a group of very vulnerable people are young people who have aged out of foster care, young people who have run away from home. They are extremely vulnerable, of course, possibly homeless on the streets, lacking all kinds of resources. And that is where people will prey upon them and exploit those vulnerabilities. Signs of physical abuse or sexual injuries. I am on the board of Aurora West Dallas Medical Center, and they have a wonderful healing center of being able to offer services for victims of sexual abuse. And part of that is the actual exam. And those are done by what are called SANE nurses or forensic nurses, who are specially trained in carrying out, very invasive medical exams after someone has been sexually assaulted. And so sometimes that is the first point where someone suspects that something has happened. And we do trainings with medical staff for that very reason. Unexplainable tattoos. This is called branding, just like we brand cattle. Traffickers can brand their stable of victims. And that could be, sometimes we see a barcode indicating they're for sale. Sometimes maybe an individual symbol like a gang. We did serve someone who was 26 years old and who was at like a trap house and was given drugs to become unconscious. When she awoke, she had a number of men around her with a gun to her head, and they forcibly tattooed the name of her trafficker across half of her face. So here's, what could be a more powerful sign of dehumanizing someone, of saying, I own you, I'm always with you, you can never escape me. That every time she looked in the mirror, half of her face had his name tattooed on it. And she said, I can't get a job, I can't get an apartment, people think I'm in a gang. That was probably certainly the most severe one that we've seen. There's a network of tattoo artists throughout the country that will do free tattoo removal or redesign something into something that's empowering for that person. But branding tattoos can be common. Hanging around unknown people or older people, it's not typical to have a 25-year-old hanging out with a group of 15-year-olds. Lost the ability to make decisions on their own. Traffickers who are very controlling will often dictate when their victims eat, sleep, use the bathroom. They're never allowed to speak. They're not allowed to look anyone in the eye. And so when we have folks who have endured that come to Freedom House, they're unable to make a decision about what they'd like to eat for breakfast. They have lost all capacity and have been beaten down so severely that they can't speak or make any kind of decisions on their own. And reporting having consensual sex in exchange either for their basic needs being met or, again, items of value, money, drugs. So not everyone will identify that I've been trafficked or this isn't normal, this isn't right. They might truly think, I love this person, this is just part of what I have to do in this relationship. Or they know that it's not healthy, it's not right, but they're in denial. And all of us can do things like that, right? Where there's something that we know is bad for us, that we know we shouldn't be doing. And it can be hard to give up. It has a lot of parallels with domestic violence. And it's easy for other people to say, well, why don't you just get out of it? Why don't you just stop? And it can be really complicated. And part of that complication can be when for the victim, it's a real relationship and they believe that it's consensual and that it's okay. This, I think, is so interesting. If somebody were to Google, why does human trafficking happen? And the answer, this is from the International Justice Mission, that traffickers cause trafficking, right? It's not a woman and the way she's dressed. It's not drugs. It's not other reasons. It's that the traffickers cause trafficking and the buyers do. And I think it's interesting. Humans have exploited other humans for profit throughout all recorded history. And whenever there's space allowed for us to abuse our power and to put others down so we can rise up, unfortunately, humans will do it. And again, right now we have the largest amount of slavery going on than ever in history. Usually I do true or false with a live audience in front of me, but these are some important points, so I'll run through them. As we said in the beginning, human trafficking and prostitution are not the same thing. Human trafficking, again, has that triangle, those three parties involved through force, fraud, or coercion. Prostitution, but legally would be an exchange between two people. We know in reality that there are very gray lines between that. We know that nobody grows up and says, I want to sell my body for sex as a career, and I'm perfectly fine with that. And that the vast majority of people who are in sex work probably have had some trauma and some sexual trauma from childhood or are doing it for survival sex. And so we also want to be clear that prostitution is also a very damaging experience to have. Trafficking involves transporting victims across borders. That's not true. Sometimes people get human trafficking confused with human smuggling. And so human smuggling, an example of that would be if people are being, smuggled across, let's say, the Mexican border into Texas. That's not the same thing. Trafficking can happen right in your own family, right in your own community. It doesn't have to cross any type of border. Number 3 is always interesting to see people's reaction to. The greater Milwaukee area has some of the highest trafficking activity in the US. And this is true. And many people are completely unaware of this and their jaws are truly dropped in front of me. They can't believe it. There are a few different reasons why this is true. The main one is that Milwaukee is on what we call the I-94 pipeline, which means that there's just easy access. If you were going to move goods, move people, drugs, or weapons, there's such an easy route here in between Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison. You go up to Green Bay or then up to the Twin Cities, out to the Dakotas where there's agriculture or fracking going on, large groups of men away from their families where there could be demand. That's one of the reasons why Milwaukee can be a hotbed of trafficking. There isn't trafficking in pornography because people participate voluntarily. This is false. Much of pornography is trafficking. Much of pornography is rape. And this is something where while we focus women, on serving women and exploit no more, there's another side to this, right? What are we doing with our boys and our men as a society? What are we doing in normalizing the explosive use of pornography, of going to strip clubs for your bachelor party? Doesn't harm anybody. This is normal, just guys having fun. What are we doing in music videos and movies and TV shows where women are being sexually objectified? And so this is something that we need to look at, right, as a society, of how are we teaching people that people are not property, that you cannot own other people and enslave other people for your benefit. So we've done, the federal government has done some cracking down on pornography. It's so difficult because, right, the internet is constantly changing. You shut something down and the next day people pop something back up. It's really, really hard to track and to try to conquer. Children can be prostituted. Nope, we talked about this, that as part of that federal definition of trafficking, anyone who's under the age of 18 who's forced to do commercial sex acts are automatically a human trafficking victim. Dancers in strip clubs aren't trafficked because they're making money, also false. Again, in a lot of strip clubs, I think we'd like to think it's a college woman who's innocently dancing and making money for tuition, and that is almost never the case. There's a lot of drugs, a lot of violent threats going on in strip clubs. That we recently served a young woman who's just 18 years old and was being trafficked in a local strip club, where the owner is in on it. They're letting things go on in the back room that's illegal, that shouldn't be going on. And he takes a cut and the bouncers take a cut for looking the other way. Recently, just in the past few weeks, a local strip club was shut down. So that's a victory, because a lot of sexual exploitation happens in strip clubs. The average buyer is a white, middle-aged, college-educated father. This is the other one that people are often super shocked at. This is true. And it's true for a couple of reasons. One would be having the means, so having disposable income to be able to buy sex. I think it's also having an ego and thinking that you are above law and not, you don't need to follow other laws and what other people have to follow. So when we see all these politicians get into sex scandals, you think, why would you do that? Why would you, and again, the Epstein situation of true trafficking. Why would you risk everything for that? Because with that power and status comes that feeling of being untouchable, and that you don't have to follow law, and that you can do whatever you want. And so we see people, people who are businessmen who are making a lot of money, who have a lot of power and status. We even have worked with a woman who said that she had a regular who would see her on Sunday mornings, would drop his wife and children off at church, go visit her at the motel, and then go back to church. And this was a regular for her. So this is, again, someone who finds it thrilling, finds it powerful, and no matter the reason, at the end, it is still buying sex from someone, sometimes children, rape, and trafficking, because they are arranging this through a trafficker. Most of it's happening online. You can order you can order a pizza, and therefore it is quite anonymous, fast, easy to do. And you don't have to go to the seedy part of town anymore. You can just do it from the comfort of your phone and make an appointment, and no one be the wiser. So that is why that is the profile of the average buyer. And most buyers pick up victims on the street corner. Certainly this happens. Certainly, in terms of the city of Milwaukee, If there are two what we call tracks. So on the south side would be, Greenfield and National Avenue. On the north side would be Brown Deer, Silver Spring. And these are where anyone could drive, that you could drive there right now and see some of this happening, and some of it's trafficking, some of it's prostitution. But again, that's not typical of how it happens anymore. Most of it is happening online. So this is heavy, right? This is sad. We live in a very, very broken world. And the stories I could tell you of what has happened to the people we have worked with would just bring you to your knees and weep. It is truly unbelievable how barbaric people can be to each other. However, there is hope. And how can you help? So people will say, well, what do I do if I see this? If you see someone who needs help immediately, call 911. Example of this could be certainly someone being beaten, someone being thrown out of a car, someone maybe being grabbed and forced into a car or forced into a motel. If you're staying at a hotel and you see someone who's way younger with an older man, all of these types of things where someone's in immediate danger, you'd call 911. We would never suggest for anyone to intervene yourself. And even well-meaning to go up to someone, let's say up to a young woman and say, are you okay? Do you need help? Even intervening in that way could end up being more dangerous for her after, because if a trafficker witnesses that, they often will give them a severe beating after, even though she didn't ask for that. They're reacting to feeling like they're being found out. So if someone's in immediate danger, 911. If you're seeing something that's a pattern, and it's not like 911 really wouldn't be appropriate, but you've seen this happen. For example, I had someone come talk to me after a presentation and say, I'm a property manager, and I've seen a young woman who is always waiting in front of a building. She's not really dressed appropriately for what appears to be her age or for the weather. And a different car comes and picks her up. I'm really concerned about it. That wouldn't really be 911 because there's probably an emergency that she's not going to admit to in that moment. But you could call and give tips about the car, the license plate, describing what's going on. And that's a lot like Child Protective Services. And if they get enough information that they can act on, they will connect with the local police and take action in that. This is the National Human Trafficking Hotline. It's an excellent hotline. You may see flyers for this in different places, like for example, at Mitchell Airport, at least in the women's stalls, they have flyers there where you can text or call. And so if you are suspecting something, you can call them. And this is what I always tell people, both in this case and in Child Protective Services. It's not your job to be right or wrong. You don't have to worry about that. It's your job as a concerned citizen to report something that you see, but it's okay if you're wrong. That's their job to investigate and figure it out. But if it's in your gut to do something, you should, if you see something, say something, because it could save that person's life.
Martha, along those lines, I hate
Yes,
to interrupt, but
no
this
problem.
just made me think there are quite a few real estate agents participating tonight, both in Illinois and Wisconsin.
Yes.
And we do often find ourselves in vacant properties. Many people who hold real estate licenses also practice as property managers. Are there any things in particular that we should be aware of that should stand out to us, that should stand out as something being off when we go into a vacant property, or just in those sorts of scenarios? What could we keep in mind?
Sure, that's a great question. Certainly, if you're seeing signs of like mattresses on the floor, unfortunately, used condoms, syringes from drugs, money, cash, things like that that have been maybe left behind, or if a squatter is coming in and using that. If you're seeing actual people, if you're seeing, again, a young person coming and going, things going on in the middle of the night. Also things like what's really prominent would be webcam pornography. And so people going on either OnlyFans or other sites. And so there's filming going on in the night, or there are a lot of flash photography maybe going on in the night in a unit that could be doing, doing photos and child pornography. So those are signs to look for. If someone has, multiple keys or hotel key cards, and people are in and out of motels, and if you see that, those would be signs of, cars coming and going, of course, right? And usually there are rules about that, but a lot of different cars happening, coming and going to the property, things like that. So again, if you saw that, you could report that to non-emergency police to check it out. If you had a concern about a particular person, again, if it was something immediate, 911, or again, that National Human Trafficking Hotline would be for anyone in any part of the country to call, and then they would connect with whatever the local police department is. Yeah, but you're great eyes out there. We do a lot of training, of course, with hospitality staff. They're seeing things at motels. We do training. Again, I mentioned medical. There's a wonderful national organization called Truckers Against Trafficking, because of course we've got folks on the road, and they're the eyes of the road. And a lot of this can happen at truck stops. And so training those drivers to be able to identify and what to do and how to help. So it's great for people to be able to have an eye out for that, and to kind of know what to look for, and to pause and to ask questions that way. And another thing to do, of course, is to support anti-trafficking organizations, which you all are doing right now, by taking time to listen to this presentation, to know what's going on in your community, and to give your support to people who are working against this. Speaking of, at Exploit No More, I mentioned before, we have 3 programs. One is the Milwaukee Resource Hub in the basement of the Freedom House. We have a large, it's like a food pantry, but it's for personal care items. We have encountered so many victims who have said, I remember we had one woman who came in and said, if I would have known that I could have gotten this shampoo, I wouldn't have had that date last night. I mean, selling your body for shampoo. I mean, we can't stand by and have that happen. So we get wonderful donations from individuals, from churches, from groups, from Jockey, from Amazon, and we have it all organized in the basement of the house. And of course, we share that with the people who are staying at our house, but we also partner with a lot of other local organizations, including the FBI, Children's, Aurora, so that someone could call us and say, either we're going to go do outreach, or we're meeting with someone right now, and this person could really use this stuff, and we'll get it in a backpack and we'll get it in their hands that day. Community education, we love to go out and raise awareness, talk with people, train people who might be interfacing with victims or potential victims, and go out and raise awareness about this really invisible crime. And then our third and largest program is the Freedom House. We purchased a 4-unit apartment complex in Milwaukee County, and brought it down to the studs and built a really beautiful home that can house 8 women at a time. We have 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, 2 lounge areas, a beautiful kitchen, and we have 24/7 staff who are professionally trained advocates. And Kelly has been a wonderful, wonderful volunteer, and some ladies that she goes to church with have been very generous and gracious. And if you want to know about Freedom House, Kelly's a great person to talk to. She comes to visit us all the time. And we house women who are experiencing homelessness and fleeing sex trafficking. Usually they stay with us for about 3 months. but we're very flexible with that. And our mission is to help get her stabilized so that she can go into her own independent housing. So we are providing all her food, her towels and hygiene supplies and bed sheets and transportation. Everyone gets a case manager. So we're doing individualized case management plans with each woman and saying, what does success mean to you? And what can we work with you on in these next few months to help get you your footing? And that's almost always getting copies of IDs. People are fleeing situations all the time and leaving behind everything that they own. And so you can't really get a job or housing without proper identification, which can be really difficult to get. So we're working with people on birth certificates and social security cards, of course, on jobs and income, on finishing any schooling. All of our clients, as you can imagine, have had severe trauma. And so getting proper therapy and any medication that's needed. Their physical health has been really ignored. And so now that they're with us in a stable place, they can probably address some physical needs that they need to. A lot of our women are non-custodial mothers. And so our house is a beautiful, safe, clean place to have visitations. We love to have them come and have their children at the house with us. So we'll do that. And then most of them qualify for subsidized housing and long-term case management. So it's really great for us to be able to transition them from Freedom House into affordable, safe, clean housing and still have support for up to 2 years. We are often told when people leave through tears that staying at Freedom House has literally saved their life. And that's true. That's true for many of them. And so we run that program. We are unique in that we are what's called low barrier, which means that we are accepting people right where they are today. If a woman shows up today, we open our arms, open the door and say, you are worthy, you are valuable, and deserve to have these resources right now. There are no conditions. You don't have to get sober first. You don't even have to be out of the life first. We are here to meet you. And for us, that is inspired by the life of Jesus, and that he ran to people who lived on the margins, and there weren't conditions, and there aren't conditions for us to be his children. Otherwise, none of us would make it, right? So we meet people where they are. And that's hard to do because we have people who are experiencing some severe mental illness and some severe substance abuse. But that's the gap that we feel called to fill. So that's what's unique. But we have a lot of colleagues doing great work in this area too. And we lift them up because this is such a huge problem here that we need as many people as we can working on these issues. One final thing, and then I'll take some questions. I know I'm over. I got chatty. Thank you for hanging there with me. One quick thing I want to show. Last year we had WISN 12 in Milwaukee, the ABC station, do a story on us. And they, at that time, I talked about how cases were up 58% in Milwaukee. COVID, made trafficking so much worse. And they came to do a story, and we never would ever pressure any of our guests to ever speak or identify themselves in any way. We don't, of course, want to re-exploit them. But for some people, being able to tell their story is very empowering, and it gives them a voice, and it makes them feel like they are letting people know what's going on and to tell their story. So we had one very brave guest who wanted to share her story. And so they interview her, and then there are some shots of the inside of Freedom House too.
It was really traumatic.
A human trafficking survivor sharing her story. She says she met her trafficker on a dating app when she was 19 years old.
Things went good for a couple weeks, and then he became a total monster.
She says he started abusing her, one time beating her until she was unconscious.
I basically woke up in his house with 5 other people surrounding me, and they told me that I now belong to them.
And how long were you in his house?
3 years.
They held her against her will and sexually trafficked her for years. is a crime that's growing in Milwaukee. According to Milwaukee police, human trafficking is up 58% since last year. This year, police have had more confirmed cases in 9 months than all of 2021.
Why are we seeing the numbers grow?
You have a lot more vulnerable people right now with COVID. You have a lot more people with lack of physical affection and touch.
Location also a factor.
That has a lot to do with the pipeline is what they call it, from Chicago, and then you go up to the Dakotas where the gas pipelines were being put in. Traffickers are going to look where is a lot of men that don't have family with them, because then that's where we're going to make a lot of money.
It sounds very strategic.
Extremely strategic.
The trauma has long-lasting effects.
Sorry, I'm trying not to cry.
But the help available at places like the Freedom House is a start.
They just let us know, like, they could help us, you know, be better than that, or just that they care.
In Milwaukee County, Kristen Pierce, WISN 12 News.
It was really traumatic.
A human trafficking survivor.
So, yeah, that was her words. We were so proud of her for sharing that story, but that's real, and that's what happened to her. And that's, a similar story to lots of the people that we serve. If there are some questions, I'd be happy to take those, or comments.
Yeah, we do have a comment question.
All right, great.
Here. In our chat, as someone who is from a society culture and with religious influence that permits such acts, it's encouraging to see that topic being addressed and given the gravity it should. I know that in the US it's not prevalent, but where I am from, it's something that isn't only prevalent, but endorsed by religious law, which has a huge bearing on federal and state law. Both boys and girls are married off at an age where they can't give consent, and this leads to health, mental, and psychological issues for them. I've read of people in the US who've married under the age of 18 with parental consent. I know it's not common here, but is child marriage something that the Freedom House has had to deal with or speak into?
Thank you for sharing that. Wow, that's really great information. So we serve adult women 18 and older. We have not seen that here. And again, as you mentioned, every state in the United States has their own law about the age where someone could marry with parental permission and then also without. We have not seen that, but what I will say is that the average age of when trafficking begins for many females is 12 or 13 years old. And that's a national average. We once had a guest who was a Native person and who had grown up on a reservation, and she had been trafficked since she was 9. And that was a cultural difference too. So we have not encountered child marriage here, but absolutely child sex trafficking.
And then there was a second question with that. What can we do as individuals who may have friends and family members who believe that child marriage is okay, meaning that these girls have been raised and groomed to accept being married off early and possibly being in polygamous relationships? How can they deal with that?
Sure. That's really hard, right? Because you want to be able to respect people's religious beliefs, people's cultural practices. And it's hard to come in and give sometimes Western ideas of that. I would say that beyond just American law or values, that there's a global understanding that a standard should be not polygamy and not child marriage, and to look at global organizations, even like the World Health Organization, who would say this is what is accepted worldwide of what is healthy for people, and being married at 12 years old to a 40-year-old is not, or the physical implications of having babies at a very young age. or you can even, look at things as far as female genital mutilation in some African countries. And so I think one way to direct that conversation is to look at, these are not just American standards, but these are global standards of what is best for developing girls, what is best for everyone's emotional, physical, and mental health. And being forced at that age to marry and to have sex and to bear children is globally accepted that that is not what's in the best health of a young girl or boy.
That's all we have for questions and comments.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again. I always am so encouraged and so appreciative when people in our community care about this topic. This is really hard work for us to do. And it means a lot to us to know that other people are out there and standing with us in this issue. I know that we'll be recording this, so please feel free to share this with other folks that you might think are interested in this topic. If you're interested in volunteering or donating or getting involved, please go to our website at exploitnomore.org, and we would love to hear from you and talk with you more about how we could partner together.
I'm gonna slide
Come on
back
over.
in with Martha. Thank you everyone so much for being here with us this evening. Thank you, Martha, so much for presenting and for all of the work that you do outside of what you've done here tonight and how you serve these women in the kingdom of God.
Oh, thank you.
I appreciate it so much, as well as everyone here at ERA MyPro Realty. We encourage you to please go to exploitnomore.org to learn more about what Martha spoke about this evening. You can always reach out to us at ERA MyPro Realty for more information, and of course, for any and all real estate needs. If you would please, as the presentation closes out, hang on for just one more minute. We have a slide with a survey that we would love for you to complete, just letting us know how we did tonight. Thank you all so much, and we'll be sending out the recording.
Thanks, Penny.